Right, great. Welcome everyone to another week of TTR. Before we officially get started today, let's go ahead and make sure that everyone takes a moment to sign in. Sign in from all participants, all community participants is encouraged. Please go ahead and use that QR code. I'll also throw the short link in the chat for that form. Today we have a very special speaker from our very own FIU community to introduce us and talk to us about what's going on with civic leadership in Miami, but more on that. Before we officially get started, some student announcements. Medallion students, a reminder that TTR is always 1 point, so make sure to take a screenshot of your login so that you can fill out your points log and submit your attendance at this TTR for 1 point. If you're interested in learning more about the Global Learning Medallion or any of our other Office of Global Learning Initiatives programs, please feel free to email glmedal@fiu.edu. We can field all of those questions or hang out after the session today. I will absolutely be here to answer any questions that you might have. FIU Global is holding a competition of sorts. If you are interested in traveling to Genoa, Italy, they are now accepting proposals for a quasi-contest to work on a World Center Italy awareness campaign. They are looking for creative, innovative proposals on structuring this campaign. If you want to learn more, you can do so at go.fiu.edu/Italy. Highly encouraged. Deadline is February 27th for those proposals. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to field them with us at the end of the session today, but you can find more information at that Go link. I didn't update this link. So this link, our Go link for today's session, it's on me. I'm very sorry. It is not February 1st. It is February 8th. But our Go link for the article that inspired today's session is go.fiu.edu/TTR Feb08. If you've gotten to that point to read the article and you're getting a firewall, right? You're getting a wall, a block wall from New York Times, you might need to just update your access, your free access to the New York Times. Everyone with an @fiu.edu email address that is in the FIU community has access to a free subscription to the New York Times. You can go to accessnyt.com so that you can update that information and read today's article and any article. Very special thank you to our assistant director that's joining us today to do the introduction for our speaker. Jenny Simone is with us to introduce our speaker for today's TTR. Jenny, you want to take it away?
Making sure I'm not muted because I've done that in the last 6 meetings. So hi, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jenny Simone. I am the Assistant Director at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, and I love working with the student programs. So super happy if you want to connect with me afterwards. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Agatha Caraballo today. A dear friend of our Office of Global Learning. So super excited to have her here. Dr. Caraballo is the inaugural director of the Maurice Ferre Institute for Civic Leadership and an associate teaching professor in the Department of Public Policy and Administration in the Stephen Green School of International and Public Affairs at FIU. She is also an affiliate faculty in the African and African Diaspora Studies program and the Master of Arts in Global Affairs degree program. She is past chair and former treasurer of the section for Women in Public Administration for the American Society for Public Administration, as well as past president of the ASPA South Florida chapter. Recently, Dr. Caraballo serves as the inaugural director of teaching for the Black Faculty Association at FIU and contributes to the university's Equity Action Initiative as a member of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Execution Team. And she loves global learning, loves our students. We work very closely with her. So we are super excited to hear you, Agatha, speak today to our students. Thank you so much for joining us.
Got to make sure I unmute myself too. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Not sure how much more I can add to that introduction, but thank you again just for this invitation. I do have the privilege of serving as the founding director of the Maurice Ferre Institute, and I'm also an associate teaching professor in the Department of Public Policy Administration. And even more important, I'm a proud FIU two-time alumna. I earned my Bachelor's of Science in Communication from the School of Journalism and Mass Communications, and my PhD in Public Affairs from the School of International Public Affairs. So really excited to talk about this topic. It's funny, I posted in the chat a link to the article as a PDF in case anyone was having trouble. There's also a link again if you have to renew your access. I know I did. I got a couple paywalls, so I'm gonna, as soon as this ends, go and renew my access as well. So if you haven't had a chance, there is the PDF in the article. But when I was first invited to do this talk last year, this article was kind of coming out around the same time as, you know, me taking on this role in civic leadership. So it was something that kind of jumped out to me. A year later, instead of picking a new article, I figured it'd be really interesting to see how much has changed around civic leadership in the Miami Tech movement over this past year. So some of you maybe have kind of heard about this Miami Tech movement. It's kind of hard to ignore because it's pretty much everywhere. But really the article talks about, you know, just the influx that has come to Miami and how it's basically created this whole kind of movement around technology. And we see it within FIU with in the different programs that we offer, the explosion of online programming, the Office of Engagement and their partnerships. There's so many different ways that technology is really impacting not only our university, but Miami in general and just the South Florida community. So I'm going to share my presentation just to give a little bit more context about the Ferre Institute and what we're doing. So let me know, everyone able to see my presentation? Okay. I'm not going to go too much into the Institute, but we'll share also some links in the chat so you can always learn more about the Ferre Institute. Our website is ferre.fiu.edu. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Mayor Ferre, so Maurice Ferre was the mayor of Miami from 1973 to 1985, is often considered the father of modern Miami. He was the first Hispanic-born and first Puerto Rican-born mayor of a major American city, and came to Miami at a time when Miami wasn't as diverse of a community as it was now. So when he became the mayor, the population, Hispanic population, was probably closer to 20% at best. Obviously not the 70% or more that we see now in the community. So when he was mayor, there was really some formidable years in the sense of this was the Mariel boat lift occurring, the McDuffie riots. But he really had a vision of what Miami could be, that it could be this global capital, that it would be very innovative, that it would serve as a model for the rest of the world. And as we talk about in the George M. Perez Metropolitan Center, FIU really is in South Florida, ends up becoming a living laboratory. Other communities, other schools really look to see what we're doing here. And I know that you guys recently had a Tuesday Times Roundtable about climate change. So it's true, a lot of communities look to see what South Florida is doing, what Miami's doing, and we really kind of set the tone for a lot of organizations. So even in the terms of our chief innovation officers, our chief heat officers, these are positions that really originated in South Florida and then other communities around the country and around the world. So, you know, this is really something to emulate. So unfortunately, when Mayor Ferre passed away in 2019, there was a push by the family to really honor his legacy. And his legacy was really around servant leadership, building coalitions, bringing communities together despite differences in terms of all the different ways that you can think of what divide us, but really focusing on more on what unites us and how we can come together as a community to address our issues and work together. So some of the pillars of the Institute, in the heart of the Institute, is its academic, research, and community programs. I'm really excited to share that starting in fall 2022, we are going to be offering certificates in civic leadership. These will be both undergraduate and graduate certificates in civic engagement and leadership. I'm going to be working closely with the Office of Global Learning to support their programs. So, for example, coming to programs like the Tuesday Time Roundtable will give you credit towards the requirements to earn those certificates as well. We aim to become a civics education and public service hub where we can connect communities with resources, individuals, and just show them all the different ways that you can get involved in the community and make a difference. We'll also be working with different entities throughout the university and throughout the community on applied research and policy analysis. A big part of our programming is engagement. We launched a fellowship program. We have a civic leadership and service series, which actually this evening we'll have Dr. Wanda Colon Molfeda and former Florida State Senator Ana Terry Flores as our guest speakers. I'll also drop those links in the chat as well. And then last but not least, working to develop a Puerto Rican studies program in collaboration with the Latin American and Caribbean Center. So civic engagement and civic leadership. We know that our community is transforming like the rest of the world. But why civic engagement? Why civic leadership? Why is this important to us as a community? Not only in South Florida, but as global citizens. And I want to encourage you to use the chat if you have any questions, use the reactions. I really want to make this more engaging and interactive. For those of you that have been in my classes, I rarely lecture, so I like to be more of a facilitator. So I want you guys to chime in, raise your hands, feel free to stop and just add your comments and questions. So along those lines, I provided a little definition of civic engagement and why it's important. A civically engaged society is more likely to vote, discuss politics at home, complete college, and some of the different ways. There is a Florida requirement to provide civics education to college students. So if you're an FIU student, that's going to require you taking American history class, a political science class. But beyond that, we really want to impact every aspect of society. It can't just be college students. It can't just be K through 12. Can't just be our citizens. We all have a responsibility within our community to be civically engaged. So along those lines, besides voting, I would love to hear some ideas, and feel free to throw out what are some other ways that people can become civically engaged in their communities. Ideas? How many of you are involved in perhaps a civic-minded organization, or can think of some civic-minded organizations in our community? Let me pull up the chat. Volunteer, citizen-led community projects, awesome. I'm sure a few of you have heard of the Rotary Club, Kiwanis, just to name a few, which are have local branches, but are really global organizations. Fantastic. Fraternities, nonprofits. We also have our own really civic-minded organizations that do a lot in our community. Breakthrough Miami, the Miami Foundation, Catalyst Miami. So there are obviously a lot of organizations that are working to promote civic engagement and leadership. And obviously FIU is very proud, as an Ashoka Changemaker campus, that we do take this serious. And we realize how important it is to empower our students, to give them the opportunity and resources, and not just students, our faculty, our staff, alumni. It really extends to every corner. and helping to people realize that there's a niche for everyone to get involved. Some will give their time, some will give their money, some will give both. Some will provide information. And I think that goes a long way. And so important is access to information. And before we actually jumped on this call, one thing I'm putting out there in the universe, and I'm hoping it'll manifest, is to be able to provide in the future, free subscriptions or subsidized subscriptions to our local newspapers like the Miami Herald or the Sun Sentinel to our students. I understand that these newspapers have to make money, but at the same time, we'd really like to perhaps find some sponsors to be able to offer that access to students so that they can stay more aware of the local information of what's going on in their communities. And also, not most importantly, is to support local journalism. Those of us in public administration, we often refer to journalism as the government watchdog. So a lot of times, it's really important to support our local journalism because they really help to keep our institutions and our leaders accountable. So in that article, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit blurry, it talks about what kind of led to this whole Miami tech movement. And a lot of it can be traced back to this tweet that kind of led to a movement. So Mayor Francis Suarez, in responding to a tweet back in 2020, what if we move Silicon Valley to Miami? And if you look at the article that we shared, it talks a lot about how the city and the mayor in particular are working to create a community that's more welcoming and inclusive to these tech entrepreneurs in particular that are moving from Silicon Valley, from New York and other places. And one thing that we want to do in the Ferre Institute is make sure that not only for our existing residents, but also for these newcomers, that we create this expectation of civic engagement and leadership. It's nice to move here and enjoy all the beautiful amenities that come with our community. But again, we don't want these newcomers to exist in a bubble where they don't, I guess, realize the responsibility that they have to the community, that we all play a role and we really need everyone to be involved and to share their opinions, and to work together to make our community more accessible to everyone. And as some of you can obviously notice in some of the things that they had mentioned, obviously it's making business more accessible to everyone. They talk about streamlining. And one thing that, of course, that comes up along in these conversations is the digital divide. That if we're doing all these technology, are we leaving behind those who have the least amount of access? So one of the programs that came out with Miami, and maybe you guys have heard about, is Venture Miami, to help connect tech entrepreneurs, especially underrepresented tech entrepreneurs, with venture capital and different levels of support to help them integrate into this new ecosystem, if you will. Oops, sorry. So as we look at, and I had mentioned earlier that there is a state requirement for civics, and it varies by state. Florida is one of the few states that are out of 14 out of the 50 that require a civics course and civics exam. So that's assuming that you're a student here, you took a civics exam, but is that enough? Is it just enough to take a course? And this is really where we want to move beyond just the classroom to applied learning. We want you to apply what you've done and actually put it into action and into your community to be able to make a difference. We have to be able to provide resources and to show our community members, both those existing and our new ones, all the different ways that they can get involved in their community, and empower them and to be able to provide it the access. Because if we're really not giving them the tools and the resources, then we're leaving it to a very small vocal bunch to be able to make decisions, and we're not taking into all the considerations and the needs and the wants that make all of our community unique, but also what brings us together. And again, just a reminder, please drop chats. Feel free to raise your hand. Again, I want to hear your thoughts and your questions. Earlier, I had asked you just to drop some ideas of some different ways that perhaps people, what we consider civic engagement. And it's not just civic engagement, it goes to leadership. Who are we voting for? If we don't support candidates that we our views align with, and hopefully some of these in this group will also consider running themselves for office. We need supporters, we need leaders, but again, everyone has a role to play. And as part of the Democratic Committee, it's important for us to realize that voting goes beyond just the federal and the national elections. Kudos to Mayor Suarez for getting 86% of the vote, but when you look at less than 12% of eligible voters voted in that election, is it really a representation of our community? So it's important that we really express our opinions and get involved not only in local elections, state elections, judges. There's so many different ways that you can get involved. And even if you're not eligible to vote, you're an international student, there's still ways that you can promote the democratic process, share information. If you're able to do so, I encourage you to become a poll worker and volunteer on election day. We recently had a voter registration drive with the League of Women Voters. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved. And again, voting is just kind of the hallmark of civic engagement, but it doesn't end there. Thinking about the way you can contact your elected officials. There's a lot of different programs now that make it easy, just clicking on a website you put on, and I'm going to drop in the chat for those of you that aren't familiar, please go to vote411.org. It's a good way to find out what issues are being considered, who your elected officials are, update your voting registration information, those kind of things. And that kind of leads to when we think about technology. I recently did a case study with Dr. Cristina Rodriguez Acosta from the Gordon Institute around public interest technology. So when we look at, obviously we're doing this meeting on Zoom, how much technology has really impacted every part of our life. So the other day when we did the voting registration, instead of having people do the traditional fill out the form, we just had them scan a QR code and complete the voter registration right on their phone. So we really have to consider how technology is changing the way not only our lives, but also the way we engage with our leaders. I don't know how many of you before the pandemic hit attended public meetings. Have you ever gone in and sat on a city council meeting, a county commission meeting? One of the biggest concerns about those was accessibility. A lot of these meetings took place in the middle of the day. So unless you could take time off, let's say for work, there weren't really childcare options available. So if you were had children to take care of. So even with this move to virtual, it's opened up access to public meetings in a way that we probably couldn't have really envisioned. It could have been going on all the time, but it wasn't until we all moved virtual that we realized, oh, here's an easy way that we can make these meetings more accessible. What I'd like to see in these meetings, public meetings, is also an opportunity to do public comments through that way, to be able to increase the engagement so that people can really chime in on issues and communicate with their elected officials and feel like they're really taking into their concerns. Contributing public comments. Again, a lot of times it's the usual suspects are the only people weighing in. And so if you're only getting one voice and one opinion, then a lot of times our leaders are going to think that that's how the majority of the community feels because they're only hearing from one particular segment. Earlier, they mentioned volunteering with nonprofits. There's a lot of great organizations to get involved in Miami. And even if you just followed Give Miami Day recently, you can see how many organizations are out in the community just doing amazing things. And that's something we'd really like to see, as especially with these newcomers that are coming to Miami, that we're creating this expectation that we need them to be involved. We need them to support our organizations, support our institutions, and when we think about our civic leaders, are there any civic leaders in Miami that jump out at you? Who would you consider to be our civic leaders? Any ideas? Any names, organizations? And again, a lot of times it is our politicians that we quickly come to mind of, but think about the nonprofit organizers. Dave Lawrence, that's a great example. We had him recently, and for those of you that don't know David Lawrence Jr., you may recognize his name as the namesake outside of the K-8 Educational Center right outside of the FIU Biscayne Bay campus. But he was also the retired publisher of the Miami Herald and is the board chairman of the Children's Trust. So he was integral in starting the Children's Movement of Florida, which is the reason why we offer, pre-K to 4-year-olds in Florida. There's the Children's Trust is a great resource for being able to identify credible child care services. There's a program that you can sign up to have a book sent to, your child from ages 1 through 5. So these are the kind of people that really have made just a tremendous impact in our community and have inspired many, many leaders. I know personally, I look up to David and have had the opportunity to have him as a guest speaker twice. And it's amazing the impact that people can have, especially when working together. And that's the thing, is none of our leaders work alone. And that's really the thing that we want to instill in these within this new Miami Tech movement, is that it's got to be a collaborative effort. Yes, there are differences, all kinds of, in terms of political affiliations, in terms of even demographics within and location. There's a difference between the community needs of Southwest Miami-Dade, Southeast Miami-Dade compared to Southwest Miami-Dade. So it's important that we identify leaders in each aspect of our community and then support them. But then we also want to connect with people. So how many of you have ever served or been a part of a community organization? A nonprofit, it could be something specific to your field, like I'm part of the American Society for Public Administration. So we obviously work to support public administration and all of the public sector services, nonprofit, local, state, and government. I've worked closely with the Rotary Club and Kiwanis. I'd like to hear some of the organizations that jump out to you that you think are really making a difference in our community. Don't be shy. Thoughts? Well, I think what's really important is with these organizations, if you're not familiar with these organizations, one of the things that we would like to do through the Ferre Institute is to create that public service hub. So if you go to our website, when we get this hub up and running, is, let's say, Engage Miami. That's a great one. Radical Partners, absolutely. There's a lot of really great organizations. So if you're not familiar with them, continue to please drop them in the chat so that we can share, if even with links, even better so people can visit these websites. The one thing that you guys need to understand is that they need you. They need your time, they need your support, in some cases your donations, but however you can support these organizations, because it's important for us that we maintain these organizations, and then also for succession. As students in particular, you are the future of these organizations. think about the different programs that are available, fellowships, to get involved. And hopefully some of you will be leading these organizations in the future. And so we need you now, and we need you in the future. And we really have to work together to think about how our community is going to come together in spite of some very challenging issues. And one thing that comes up a lot when we talk about this Miami tech movement, and I'm sure you guys have perhaps maybe seen some articles or even just their personal experience, what this is meaning for affordability and for access for our existing residents. You might have seen some recent numbers that housing costs and rent has increased by up to 30% in some areas of South Florida. And while some of our newcomers coming from Silicon Valley and New York, have more disposable income, it's important that we keep in mind that all aspects and all, parts of our society in South Florida are important. So we can't not consider how some of them are being priced out. And we see the impact that it's obviously going to have. We're still very much a tourism industry in South Florida, but similar to what kind of happened in the Keys is that if there isn't affordability, you're going to have real issues with workforce. Because again, if lower wages, they can't afford to live here, then who's going to serve those positions and fill those positions? So it's important that we think about how we share these concerns with our elected officials, but then also work with organizations that can help alleviate some of these issues and to help provide solutions. But again, if they're only hearing from one segment of the community, they're not going to realize how grave this issue is and how we can address some of these things. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. And want to ask you all, again, just to share some examples of how do you define civic leadership? What are some of the ways that you feel that you can make a difference in your community or you have? Anyone want to share? I'm going to pick on some people. Start calling out people.
I'll make a quick comment. I think part of it is just finding an organization that you really have a passion for in serving. And like for me, I'm very passionate about programs that help at-risk youth. And so whether they're having an event in Miami-Dade County, whether they're having an event or just a walk-in event for family members who have had a member impacted by gun violence, those are some of the organizations that I seek to support just by being there and volunteering and giving back through my research. So that's one way I give back. And I think that has a lot to do with, civic leadership, because through these events, I meet a lot of elected officials, so you can actually have a conversation with and really discuss what it is that you want to see change. So that's how I give back.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I tell students a lot about public administration. The great thing about public administration is that it's so broad. Sometimes the bad part about it is that it's so broad. It covers so many different aspects of society. But the great thing about it is there really are career niches for everyone. It covers a lot of different areas. So when you think about the same thing with your civic leadership and the advocacy, follow your passion. If it's working with youth, it's working with animals, with seniors, with kids, perhaps it's around the environment. There's a niche for everyone, and there's a role to be played for everyone, and we need your service in all different areas. So when you follow what kind of really speaks to you, believe me, these organizations want and need your assistance, and they need your passion above all else. They want people who are really passionate and want to make a difference, and they'll help you. Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of fielding things from the chat here. What other kinds of intersections are there with other issues in the community that are already in discussion, especially as it has to do with this, influx of Miami tech? So we talked about housing affordability and affordability in general, and we know that's huge. But are there any more? Environmentalism, education, are there things that are already in conversation that we can educate ourselves on a little more?
Absolutely. And I'm going to share a couple links from the Metropolitan Center. They did some studies. These are a little bit dated, but they're still relevant, that talk about, for example, the digital divide. And as we're talking about technology, and as we're all moving into this virtual world, there's more remote working. Children were, learning online for a while. What does that mean about access? I know there are programs such as Comcast Essentials that offer low-cost internet, but without access, not only devices, internet, but also training. It really has to be a combination of all those things in order to help kind of bridge those gaps. We talked about economic opportunities and what is changing there. Obviously, as some industries are growing, others are shrinking. And that kind of also ties to affordability, and we see even down in Homestead in different areas, as more of it's being developed, what does that mean for our agricultural, industry down there? So there's a lot of different changes going on, and part of that is just following the ecosystem of where the community is going and where it's prioritizing. But I think the biggest thing is that we pay attention. That's kind of the first one, because again, if we look at the signs, then we can see the trends and we can see the directions that we're going in. But if we're not paying attention, then sometimes by the time we do react, it might be a little too late. And I think that's really where it's important. And again, I'm going to just keep reiterating this, is that we reach out to our elected officials, that we support those that we believe in. And again, perhaps considering being those candidates, if you don't find the candidates that, that you can support or that align with your values. So when we think about, and again, housing affordability is going to be a big one. What does that mean? As we're going, for example, through different searches, even at FIU, we often hear faculty who are considering moving here, but then realize the cost of housing is just too prohibitive. That for the same salary, it can go a lot further in the Midwest or in other parts of the country. And I'm sure many of you have heard the term about the brain drain. And it's even something that's kind of mentioned in the New York Times article, is that, until very recently, we had a lot of our college educated professionals who left South Florida because the opportunities just weren't here. That, if you wanted to work in certain industries, the expectation was that it just wasn't here in Miami. But if we want to keep our talent here, and one of the articles and the quotes is from Leanne Buchanan, that mentions that FIU produces some of the greatest numbers of Black engineers out of schools. And some of you may not know that even the number of Black students that graduate from FIU is comparable to some HBCUs. And what does that mean in terms of diversity? But again, if those diverse talent pools are all relocating out of state to find opportunities, then again, we're at a disadvantage when we can't even keep our own homegrown talent if they can't afford to live here. So it's important that we think about what this means, is that if we want to create a community that's committed, that's engaged, and wants to be in South Florida in the long run, we have to be able to make it accessible. Because again, I personally know too many friends who loved Florida, but again, ended up having to leave because it wasn't feasible to continue living here. And if we're having this influx of new residents, again, we need to protect our current residents, but we also have to create this expectation that these newcomers are going to care about the community, and that they're going to want to get involved in all aspects of civic life and to support the community. because it's easy perhaps in the article they mentioned about creating these little enclaves in Hibiscus Island and in some very kind of Tony. But if you live in these little bubbles like Fisher Island, and you're not aware of the reality of what the majority of Miami citizens are facing, then there really isn't a motivation to make things better. And that's really where we have to bring in all aspects of the community. And part of this Super Citizens project that we're working on through Miami and Miami-Dade County is to identify a group of citizens that are motivated and that want to help basically be ambassadors to create an exponential growth of other like-minded citizens and residents. Because again, it really takes one to teach one and then to keep passing it forward. So even coming out of this session today, I hope you will think about your responsibility to our community and all the different ways that you can get involved. And I hope that you'll reach out and connect with us. We're happy to help provide resources, direct, or just put you in contact, you know, and be a resource to you in any way that we can. I'm going to go to the chat just for a moment. So that's a great example. So there's a lot of intros. As you probably already know, Superintendent Caraballo went to LA. And so we have a new Miami-Dade County Public Schools superintendent. And there was quite, you know, some concern about the fact that he doesn't live in Miami-Dade County. And there's now talks about being a stipulation in this contract, you know, that he moved to Miami-Dade County. And that brings up an important question, you know, how important it is for our leaders to have a real tangible tie to our community. And yeah, Jean brought up a good question. I mean, if you read through the article, there's a lot of opulence in there, you know, in the sense of, and my concern is that it is creating more of a divide, not just the digital divide, but the us versus them, the old versus the new, the haves and the have-nots. You know, and the only way that we're really going to be able to thrive and be sustainable as a community is if we find ways to come together and work together. So I know we're coming up towards the end of our time, so I do want to definitely encourage some discussion, and I want to hear from all of you as far as for your thoughts. Hi, Jenny.
I just wanted to, well, obviously through the Global Learning Medallion and some of our programs, we provide those civic leadership opportunities, but I know that you have committee meetings. And I know that oftentimes students feel either overwhelmed by the issues or isolated, or they're the only ones who care. So if you at some point can drop, the link to those committee meetings that you have, because there are opportunities based on your interest to connect with other students on campus, staff, faculty who's interested in making a difference. And you can do it through communications, you could do it through the public policy lens. So if you want to talk just for a few minutes about the committees and maybe have some of the students here today, reach out.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I really do appreciate that. So through the Ferre Institute, and I'm going to drop this link in the chat, and let me actually just share my screen, some of our upcoming programs. So within the Ferre Institute, we really, again, want to find ways to help you engage and connect with other like-minded individuals who, you know, are empowered and want to make a difference within their communities. So within this, I'm going to share our calendar link. We do have several committees, and we welcome all students, alumni, faculty, staff, and just general community members to join our organization and find out how you can help support our mission. So we have a fundraising committee, and within this committee, obviously, it's looking at philanthropic donations, but also grants. So if you're interested in learning about grant writing and finding some of the different funding sources that we're pursuing to support civic leadership, that would be on our fundraising committee. And that meeting, let's see, our next one would be March 2nd. Tonight, we're going to have Dr. Wanda Colon Molveda, who's a retired senior executive service in the Social Security Administration and former state senator, Anatory Flores. That's part of our Civic Leadership and Service series, and that is an offshoot of our engagement committee. So this is finding ways for students to connect with different community leaders. We have a fellowship program where we work with students to help provide professional development opportunities, find them mentors and other awesome opportunities, like with the Office of Global Learning, to help support their development. Our communications committee is really what handles our social media. So search for FIU Ferre on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. And if you're interested in supporting our communications committee, you can join that one. We also, again, have our Puerto Rican Studies program. Hopefully, when it's safe to do so, we hope to bring a group of students to Puerto Rico, and hopefully maybe even a virtual trip for those of you, the online students that would still like to have that exposure. Our monthly meetings. So on the fourth Friday of every month, we have an open monthly meeting. All are welcome to join us. And what we do is we have our committees give updates about the different programs, what they're working on. And then we just do a meet and greet. It's really to network and connect with like-minded individuals. And also on that day, we also have a faculty and fellows forum writing workshop. So if you have a writing project that you've been trying to work on and you need to block off some time, feel free to stop by our workshop. We'll put you in a breakout room with a partner to hold you accountable, to just help make some progress on whatever writing project you are working on. The other thing that I wanted to share, and again, I'll share this calendar link in the chat. So for anyone that is interested, can definitely check out that calendar, click on any of the links to join us. And the other thing is I'm going to drop also in the link, my Calendly link. I'm happy to meet individually with anyone that has any questions and would just like to learn more about the Ferre Institute and how they can contribute or support. And there's different ways to support. We have internships, which can be done for academic credit. We have our fellows program. We have our supporters. And really just our partners. So there's a lot of different ways, and we welcome your involvement, big or small, and we just really appreciate the passion, and we want to nurture that, to make a difference out in your community. Michelle?
Yeah. So how do you suggest we go about finding, or does the Institute already have kind of a resource that brings together ways that the city, county, tri-county area is already engaging with, especially the influx of Miami tech?
Absolutely. So we're actually, I may be kind of getting ahead of myself, but we have been in discussions with Miami-Dade County Mayor Danielle Levine Cava and Emerge America and some other organizations about creating a civic leadership brigade, which we're calling our super citizens. To really, again, foster not only that expectation of civic leadership, but also to connect with resources when we do have right now we have a landing page on SIPA, but once we have our full website up, we'll be able to have links to different organizations, like some of the ones that were mentioned in the chat. But really what we're doing right now is working individually on one-on-one. So I'm happy to meet with anyone individually, hear a little bit more about their interests, their passions, and then work individually to help make those connections. So whatever area you may be interested in, will help facilitate invitations, kind of help point you in the right direction, but really providing that support so that you can make the biggest impact. Other questions? Comments, concerns?
I have a quick question.
Yes, please.
So this is about what we can do from our end, right? How we can get involved. If you were asked to talk to some of these newcomers to Miami, how would you sell their getting civically engaged, how it's going to benefit them? I want to kind of hear it on the flip side.
Absolutely. I think the expectation is that if you're going to be a resident of this community, that we want you all in. Not just on the peripheral. We want you to really engage with all aspects of our community, support our institutions, not only FIU and our other universities, but connecting with those nonprofits that are doing great work in our community. In kind of the same way, I would really encourage them to find those niches that really kind of speak to them. But also, again, there's so many great organizations that there's no shortage for them to pick up, but the time is now. That really, it's not something that we can wait on or say maybe tomorrow, maybe next year. I would encourage them to join as a nonprofit, join a board, perhaps join one of the advisory boards at one of our local universities, perhaps consider joining any of the various groups or boards within our county and our cities, to lend their voices. And if they don't do that, then to lend their money. There's no, obviously these organizations, if you don't have time, perhaps you have money, there's a lot of different ways that people can get involved. It's important for them to find what works for them, but most importantly, not just to stand on the sidelines. Great questions. Thank you. Other questions, comments? What are some of the other ways that you think that perhaps, or examples of what you're doing in the community to get involved? Are any of you leaders in student organizations at FIU? Clubs, perhaps by show of hands. Feel free to use the reactions, or a lot of times it starts, you can start off small within your department, your school, your university, your city. Again, everyone's going to find what works kind of best for them. The important thing is to do it, to get involved. We all need your time and your expertise. There's a niche and a role for everyone. So never doubt that how valuable you are to these organizations and to our community, because we do need you.
There's a really good question in the chat, Dr. Caraballo, that just, I don't know if you see it.
Absolutely, and that's a great idea. I'm gonna screenshot that and bring that up. I actually do. I do think that if we're, and one of the links that I came up with when I looked at the articles earlier, and kind of just seeing what was, they had mentioned the eStart, which was an organization that was formed to help facilitate business creation in Miami. So I do think that communities should offer some kind of incentive, either cities, maybe perhaps, a tax incentive, different priorities. But a lot of things is also recognition. People love recognition. I mean, if you looked around FIU, people love to put their name on a building. And you think about some of the big institutions, civic leaders of days past, that were building libraries, that were building opera halls and different things like that. Since these aren't things that sometimes government does provide, we do need philanthropists, and we need those as well. And so I'd like to see, again, if they're not going to be actively aboard, that they're supporting them. I'm going to give a lot of credit to Mackenzie Scott Bezos. She's not a member of our community, but you could definitely argue that her $40 million gift to FIU is going to have a tremendous impact. So really thinking about that we can all make a difference, and whether big or small, but it's important to be engaged. And I think that's the most important thing. And that's the message that I'm going to just keep on. There's a role and a place for everyone. But again, you have to be in it. It's kind of like the lotto. You got to be in it to win it. And definitely phone and email your legislators, support amazing groups like our own United Faculty of Florida, which I used to be a member of, and still support. Again, there's niche groups for just about every interest and facet of our community life. So really what I suggest is find what speaks to you. It's the same thing kind of when I do career advising. If you really want to be happy in your career, follow your passion. You know, in some cases, you know, if you think about what really you enjoy and what lights your fire, it doesn't become a career, it becomes a calling, you know, and that's what we want civic leadership to be. It's a responsibility that we instill from day one. So from kindergarten, pre-K on up, there's an expectation that you're going to give back in one way or another to your community. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to entertain any final thoughts, questions.
We are almost
Quite
out of
bunch.
time. I want to jump in here and thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like not only ideas, but specific organizations that we can look into and see if they match with our passion and the way that you've described and speaking out in terms of our perceived, you know, what we perceive the impact will be with Miami Tech moving to, you know, moving in here. So thank you for coming and sharing with us today. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you who came and joined us.
Thank you again for joining, and I hope everyone has a great week and go out and make a difference.
Ouais, mais c'est